All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started today. Thanks again for joining us. I am going to introduce the presenter today. His name is Greg Roark. He is our Director of STEM Education and is going to fill you in with all the great tips and tricks to run your classroom. Greg, if you are ready, we'll go ahead and get started.
All right, there we are. Greetings, everybody. How do I look? Hey, guys, I appreciate everybody tuning in today. And I just, first of all, want to thank you for dialing in and just kind of see some of the tips and tricks that we have. First things here first is that I don't necessarily profess that I am the absolute expert when it comes to the distance learning thing. I have been doing it quite a while. And so in over the 10 years that I've actually been doing distance education with high school and middle-aged kids, there are some things that I have learned in the past, mostly through horrifically bad decisions that I have made or things that I thought were going to be great that turned out not so great. So what I'd like to do is to have a conversation with everybody here today about some of the things that I have learned. There are probably those of you out there that could do this 10 times better than me with things like this. And we're actually going to have time at the end where we will have, we'll be able to answer some questions that you may have, comments, best practices, things that you may have that you would like to share with the group that we have on here today. Also, I wanted to let you know that I also have an article that that will be published, if it hasn't been published already, on this topic here as well, that you can tune into. And again, we'll have this, I think, recorded here for posterity if someone would like to go back and watch this again. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go ahead and get started. A couple of housekeeping things before we do here as well is that with regard to signals, we understand how signals come in and out, and so if and when the signal drops out, just tune back in. Again, we will be recording this so that you can catch up another time if you'd like. Also, as I said before, we'll be doing questions at the end. If you'd like to, on the chat function here on the GoToWebinar, if you'd like to type in your questions there, we'll kind of put those in a parking lot. We'll put them on the tarmac here for a while, and then we'll get to those questions here once we kind of get to the end of this little conversation that we're going to have. So with that, I'm going to move my eyes away from the camera, and I'm going to look down at my screen here to go ahead and to begin here with our program here today. Stand by here as I move this around. Okay, and I want to show this. We will show the PowerPoint there, and that is now, as I look here at my audience view on this, we should be looking here at the PowerPoint. And with that, we are going to kind of go through, as Joey mentioned before, and again, before I forget, I do want to thank Joey so much for being able to help with this today, because it's so much easier and so much better, I think, when Joey is part of the mix. So there we go. And so with that, we're going to proceed on here to the tips and tricks that we have here to manage this virtual classroom. And when we look at this, guys, and with regard to this first point, the one thing that I want to make clear to everybody here is that when we're looking here at e-learning, distance learning, virtual learning, whatever type of learning you want to call this, where we're not actually there in person, I get it. This is probably not the kind of thing that we said, oh, hey, when I want to be a teacher, this is what I want to do. I want to teach through a computer. And so it may not be our preference. But the one thing that I would encourage everyone to do is to kind of look at this from maybe a different angle. And that angle being is like, this is where we are. These are the lemons that we have. How do we make lemonade? How is it that we can make a positive out of this here as well? And so those hopefully will be some of the themes that you'll be seeing here as we go through the program here today. With that, next point here that I'd like to make, and here we go. Sometimes as we do these things, we are forced to find ourselves in a position where we improvise and adapt. things aren't going to necessarily go the way that we planned them, but we're going to figure it out anyway, and we are going to use that positive attitude to make that happen. So then here with that, this is a component here when we look at the transferring of knowledge here, and we look at what is it that we're ultimately after. And when we're after that, we're actually looking here again at, are we actually educating kids? That's it. Is there efficacy in what we're doing here with this? So we'll be looking at those things here again today as well. Then also with this, we are going to be looking here at how to manage the tech that we have here, the technology that we're going to be using, which I think this is kind of an interesting time to actually practice that technology, given the fact that the T in STEM stands for that. And then also managing those expectations. What is it that from our expectations are we needing to do? And what should students be thinking about here with regard to expectations for them as well? So with that, from a preparation standpoint, when we look and we know that here we are, we're going to be doing a virtual class, we look at these. One of the things that I found that was kind of important, to me at least, was to actually look at my material again. There were times when I first started teaching this, and we looked at you know, what the materials were that we were going to be using here. And when we did, there were times that when we looked at this and we said, you know, the materials as I have them right now don't necessarily lend themselves to the small screen like perhaps they did the classroom. And so with that, that's one of the things that we have to look at, looking at the type of materials that we have. And I am switching this on here now again, guys, and this is one of those things where we manage expectations and we look at the broadcast and see kind of, you know, what's going to happen here. So with this, you look at these things and we say, how will this stuff be translated to the screen? And then we have to ask what kind of screen it actually is. Because if we look at this and we think, okay, we're going to be looking here at, the possibility then of you know, looking at this on a computer. Are kids going to be using an iPad? You know, how is that going to work exactly? And again, you can see here that that we're still figuring out. I say we, I mean me, figuring out how this is actually working here. And I am going to give me just a second here, guys, because this is one of the things here that's kind of part of what we're doing, is getting this squared away. It appears that my camera here, from my perspective here, I know that I'm sharing here my webcam, so I'm going to trust that you guys are able to see me if you need to with this, and I will continue doing what I'm doing here on the materials here as well. Changes to your materials. When you look at the materials, one of the things that I mean by that, when you look at your materials, is again, how are those going to look on a screen? Are there going to be things where in the past you have not used a handout for something that maybe now you may have to use as a handout, especially if it has a lot of detail on it? And we'll talk about that here in a little bit as we move on with this. And then we look and think, what types of changes may be necessary to your presentation here again. Looking at the supplemental materials, I mentioned the handouts there before with all of that, to see just kind of what needs to happen here to get the kids the materials that they need. And then, of course, any changes to your expectations that you have here on this course also. So those are going to be some of the things there that we need to address as we prep for a course like this that we may be doing. when you look up here and you start looking at the platform, it's like today. Today we are on GoToWebinar. In the past, with what I have done, I have always been kind of the recipient here of being on this platform. And for instance, Joey has handled a lot of the actual mechanics behind the scene with this. And so with this is something where I would want to actually do a lot of practice with this GoToWebinar to find out exactly what it will and kind of what it won't do. Because if you don't know the ins and outs of your platform to know what it can do for you, or perhaps more specifically, what it won't do for you, then those are going to be some of the things that you may want to know. It could be in your school district that you have some form of a platform that your school uses, and they may put you through some form of training there for it with this. Sometimes you're kind of forced into a situation where you sort of have to fend for yourself. And so with that, that's when you want to go online, go to YouTube tutorials. They have a lot of those. They do have those here for GoToWebinar as well. So you have participant tutorials. You also have organizer and presenter tutorials that are available to you to kind of give you a little bit better idea about what can happen, what assets that you have within the platform itself, or to find those shortcomings, because those types of things may ultimately affect the decisions that you make with the material changes that you may have to do this course online. And then, as I mentioned before, there's this practice element that you're going to want to do here for any kind of a platform that you use. The GoToWebinar piece, I will be completely honest with you guys, is the fact that this one is new to me. There have been some other platforms that I have used in the past, but what I wanted to do was that instead of doing it through the studio that I normally use to do this, I really wanted to make this actually a tutorial, if you will, on a webinar, actually using the webinar here itself to use it, just to kind of show some of the things that you're going to be up against. When you look at the plan, again, looking at the materials that you have, any changes to your syllabus, you're probably going to want to know that up front with that, because when you look at those changes that you have to the syllabus, this again, there may be an order of things that you may have to shift somewhat to do that. There may be, again, some of the handouts that you have been used to going through in your class that you may now need to do differently. There also may need to be some additional materials that you produce electronically to go with the type of presentation that you do. Now, you may be fortunate enough to have an electronic textbook that would allow you, access to this as you go. You may have to make copies of all of that, and you may have to do your own electronic copies. So do you put that on a PowerPoint? Do you have it on a different file that you can access easily as you're kind of maneuvering through the actual mechanics of using the platform itself? So those are some questions that you're going to want to know. And this, again, as I just kind of previewed there, the materials and the visuals, making sure that they're queued up, making sure that when you pull those up, that you know how they're going to be manipulated. Another thing here too is that thing about keeping time. If your class is going to be a 45-minute class, it's probably a good idea to start it a few minutes early, and then again, you may want to, just as we did today, give a minute, maybe two, of other people to get in, because sometimes people are used to dialing in, they can get in with no problem. But then, just like what happened to us today, is that we were looking and we dial in, and then all of a sudden it took a while for that connection to actually come through. So with that, offer a little bit more time perhaps for people to get on. And as they do with some of the attendees, you can actually scroll down to the bottom here on your toolbar, and you can look at the attendees and see exactly who's here anyway. That can be also captured electronically for attendance purposes, etc. So, but keeping track of the old clock on the wall, one of the things that I use when I'm doing my classes is I'll do, if I'm doing a 45-minute class, I'll start start a 45-minute timer here, just so that I can just kind of, make sure that I know where I am time-wise. With this here again, I can tell that we've been going here for about 16 minutes. So with that, we can look here and see where we are. This timer, this is one that I actually got for use with our simulators. You can get timers like this for less than $10. You can spend a lot of money on timers. Some people will use their phones. So there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of keep track of the time as we do these. One thing here too, as we do this, is understanding that the actual e-learning process here, a lot of this has to do with the picture, with how are we looking here on the screen. And some of you have noticed that even now, if you go to some of your major news channels, etc., and now we have all of these experts that are appearing talking about who knows what, and they're attempting to communicate through their computer, through Skype, through Google Hangout, through whatever. And you can see that when they're talking, they're looking over here, they're looking at something is going on here, they're looking down here at their screen because this is where they see the faces, when in fact, the camera is right there. One of the big things that I learned with the kids early on was that this eye contact portion is real important. So one of the things that I recommend to people when they start out is whatever device that you're using, find where that camera is. Is it on the laptop, on your iPad? Is it on the top of your screen? Is it over here on the side of your screen? To find out where that is, and that is where you're directing your presentation. This is your audience right here. So when you're doing that, it's that little camera piece there. So is looking at that. You also want to look at your lighting. What kind of lighting do you have? If you're doing this with a camera and you have backlighting, meaning that you have a lot of light in there coming in behind you, you're going to look relatively dark and it's kind of hard to see. And if it's hard to see, people are going to begin to lose interest. So what you may need to do is to add some supplemental light in the foreground. And what you do is that you can put little lights. It can be as simple as turning on a lamp, let's say, in front of you there, or if you have like a taller lamp that you can turn one of the lights there to kind of get it going here in your face. Another example of some different lighting is something like this. So this is a box of lighting here. And what this is that this is a little standalone light, and this is all it is. But now when you use a light like this, it's going to be on or off. There's no dimmer function to this one. These are two little cheap ones. I paid 20 bucks for this, for both of these lights. And I'm actually using one here today. They come with different filters so that you can look at this here with different filters to kind of make you look so that you're not necessarily kind of washed out or something where it's just like a different color than you actually are. And I'm going to turn this around here so you can see this light that I'm actually using. And so as you can see here, it's like all on. Well, to kind of diffuse some of that light, I just use some painter's tape down here at the bottom part of it, because if I opened this up and I used just all of the light here that it had, it would blind me. And so that's just a little too much. So all I did was just use a little painter's tape on here. I used the amber diffuser on this thing, and that's what I'm using right here today. So again, this is one of those things where I went to practically no expense to try to make the picture look a little better. When you have a darker picture on your screen, your computer has to work super hard to make that image look lighter. That's where you get some of that graininess to the image that you have. So again, adding a little supplemental light in the foreground may help you a lot. Look at your angles. If you have something in the background, for instance, if you're in front of a television or a screen, or there's some print that has a glass in front of it, sometimes you have to watch the angles of that light, because what you can do is you can put like a hot spot behind you here where all that happens is that people see a light behind you. So you may need to adjust that light at different angles so that it does what it needs to do for you, but then it also, with that, doesn't create things in the background that are distracting. Uh, Positioning yourself in frame. I don't have the right now on my screen, I don't have an image of me on here, but normally what you want is when you position a camera, you want to get about just, about here, 2 or 3 inches above your head here as well. And then you want about this much of you here in the frame. If you're way too far back, it gets a little weird, because now it's like the kids can kind of see you, but they can't really see you. And then again, you can be too close. Okay. So just kind of keep that in mind as far as like how you do this. You can look also at some of the newscasts, the way that they frame the newscasters, in their frame for their television shows, and to give you some idea about how to kind of adjust your framing. Uh, a stable base, sometimes when people use a camera that's actually on, let's say, the lid of a computer. So for instance, and I'll show you this one here. Here, for instance, this is my MacBook Pro. Well, the camera is right here on this. Well, if I have something where the base is not real stable, this begins to wiggle and it looks like I'm in an earthquake. So finding that stable base can also be a big help with kind of keeping that image stable, because the big thing that we're trying to do here is to set up a nice frame, but also to create as few distractions as we possibly can here for the kids. The not too close, not too far thing, I kind of covered that, I think, sufficiently there again. Then we get down to how do you sound? So when going through this and polling the kids, when I first started doing this back in 2009 is when I first started doing distance learning here with kids. And I would poll them, and I would also poll their parents as well, as they would look at things and to say what's working, what's not working. A couple of the big things were the imagery. How does the picture look? How do you look on camera here as far as like making that connection with the kids visually? And then the second piece is how do you sound? So with that involves a microphone. A couple different kinds of things here on the microphones. There are microphones built in to most types of either laptops, Surface Pros, iPads, things like that, where they have an internal microphone with internal speakers. A couple of issues that can come up with that is this. Let's say that you don't have any option but to set up in an environment where it may be a little noisy around you. Well, that internal microphone is going to pick up everything, and that could be a little distracting. So you may need to go with something like an external microphone. An example of an external microphone is like what you see that I'm wearing here right now, where I look like air traffic control with this. Because I looked at this and I said, okay, from a picture standpoint, how does the picture look? From a sound standpoint, how do I sound? And I went through several different types of mics to find out which one worked best with this platform and with the unit that I'm using. By the way, I'm using a Microsoft Surface Pro is what I'm using to actually broadcast this. The reason I'm using the Surface Pro, I started out here yesterday with with my MacBook Pro, but for whatever reason, the Surface Pro seems to run this program better, so I'm using that. So that's part of it. So with it, what stuff works best with it? So one of the things that everybody has seen here are going to be the AirPods. So these are very popular, and in some cases, these can be a viable option. You connect this Bluetooth-wise, and then when you go in and you start your program, you're going to go to your settings, you're going to look at your audio, you're going to look at your visual, you can select the camera that you're using, you can select the speakers that you're using, whether that be the internal speakers, whether they be external speakers like this, get those dialed in. I also have the AirPod Pros. Now the AirPod Pros are nice because they have that noise cancellation thing around it, which kind of helps you focus on the task at hand. And they also work pretty well, but in some cases, they may not sound as good on certain devices as the others. I was using these yesterday, and we found out that this particular microphone, the microphone that I use with my Dragon dictation program, this one actually worked better, and actually the people that were listening said it sounded better. So this is the one that I went with. It's not necessarily as comfortable to wear. There is a wire on here, more about wires in a minute. But you know, I do think that if it sounds better, then that's a plus. Another microphone that you may want to go with here is that, you know, you can go with more of a studio quality type of microphone if you choose. The reason that I don't necessarily use those is I move around a lot and I move around when I talk. Well, this one sits on a base, and in order for this to actually work the way it's intended is that I kind of have to be pretty stationary to it. And so this allows me to move around a little bit more than something like the blue microphone that I have here. I also wanted to show you this. Here's another way that you can go. This, I call this my Britney Spears. So with this, you know, you can put this on your head and you can have this where, again, it comes right here. The difference is going to be is that the connection with this type of a microphone system is kind of a lavalier set where you basically have different types of connections that you have, and you have to go through a couple different type of adapters to get to your computer. Understand that I'm probably one of the biggest geekazoids out there with regard to tech, and I love all that stuff. A lot of people, yeah, maybe not so much. So this may or may not be a viable option to you. It's certainly a lot more comfortable than what I'm wearing here, but it does not have the speaker in there for me to hear. This is an example here of a lavalier setup, and this is a kind of a thing where for about 120 bucks, you can have an external lavalier mic that can be right here, but you're going to have either the speakers on your computer that you listen to, or perhaps have some other earbuds that you listen to. So this is another type of a microphone system that you could use. There is also this type of a microphone, Bluetooth in nature, it's wireless. But when you're doing any of these broadcasts like this, the one thing that I have found is that if you are able to hardwire everything, you're probably going to be better off. Even your Ethernet, your Wi-Fi signal itself, if you have the ability to hardwire your internet signal to your systems, as well as the hard wires for your mics, your cameras, whatever it is, just in my experience, it's a little bit more fail-proof than it is the wireless connections. So anytime that I can, I try to connect everything with a wire. I forgot to show you this too. So from a how do you look standpoint, this is the camera that I'm using right now. This is a Logitech external webcam that they're getting kind of hard to find. It took me a while to actually get this because I've got two other external cameras and I couldn't find them. So I had to go find this, and this became kind of a quest yesterday to find this because so many people now are doing exactly what we're doing right now, which is communicating and teaching and meeting online. And so with that, these types of things are getting harder and harder to find in the stores. Amazon, you can go online and you can order these all day long and, you know, get them wherever you get them. I have tried some of the cheaper kind of brands that I did not recognize before, and I have not had as much success with it. So I will say that my experience, again, some of the name brand products that you have with your hardware, especially with the camera, I think is probably money well spent. And I spent $55 on this camera that I have. I do have a little tripod underneath it that I had with one of my little small cameras, and so that's how I've got it elevated here. So I've got this view as opposed to shooting up here from below. The background. So when we look at a background like this, also give some thought not just to the foreground here, but also to the background. What's going to be behind you? YouTube is full of all of these little bloopers about people who are doing either meetings or teaching or whatever and having stuff, some interesting antics happening behind them. So you might want to be mindful about what's behind you. There have been some really cool things that I have seen with people looking like they're in an aquarium, doing all of this other stuff. But again, what I have found is that the simpler, the better. anything that kind of pertains to the actual subject matter that you may be teaching is probably best. Something that does not have any movement is better, because again, this focus that you have here, you want that to be on the kids. You don't necessarily want them wondering what's going on behind you. So kind of keep that in mind there with regard to how you set up your background. Sometimes you may not have much of a choice at doing that. Sometimes you have just taken a simple rod and hung a screen behind you to simplify things, just depending on where you have to get set up to run your broadcast. So just kind of keep in mind the background matters as well. Less movement is better, simpler is better. So again, just my experience in this. So one of the things that we talked to when we set this up is that you have your views about how distance learning can be, whether you like to do it, whether you don't like to do it, whether you think, okay, this is going to work, or gosh, I'm not so sure. Those are going to be some of your thoughts. But then you also have to put yourself in your students' shoes. Here they are. They're forced into this thing just like you are in some cases. And so when you look at this, you kind of need to know that going in. So that first meeting that you have with your students, where you go through and you practice all the mechanics of the platform itself, and you have, figuring things out, how this is going to work, how it's going to run best for you. Also, some messaging may not be a bad play here with this also. And that is going to be your establishing those expectations that you have for the students as you go through these classes. When you set those expectations, understand that if you haven't done this a lot, that you're going to be learning along with them as well. And so it's okay to kind of say that, listen, we're going to get better at this as we go. We're going to figure this out. And guys, we're going to make this happen. We're going to improvise and adapt. We are going to make this happen. The tone that you use in that message is going to go a long way to making your life simpler in the long run with these classes. And I'm sharing this here because I have heard these stories from others. This is one of the traps that I did not get into early on, because I really wanted to learn more about the distance learning thing, because I felt that STEM classes, in this particular case aeronautics classes, almost lent themselves to this being a good platform for learning and a good platform for teaching. Because again, we're modeling the behavior that we're going to be positioning kids for down the road. We look at these STEM classes like this is like, again, it's the kind of thing where I think that distance learning here with STEM courses can be just as effective as they can be with you not necessarily in the classroom, but you being in the classroom. So I think they can. Letting your kids hear that and letting your kids say, look, you know what? This is where we are. This is how we're going to do it. And guys, we're going to be okay. We're going to learn. We're going to be learning some additional skills that you can use down the road. Because here's the thing, some of you going to college here after high school. Well, guess what? A lot of your college classes now, online, okay? Some of the high school classes that you may be taking right now, some of your electives, online. When you get into your JOB down the road here as well, and we look at that, guess how your training is going to be delivered? Yep, online. So let's learn how to do it. Let's learn how to be online learners with this, and setting your kids up like that, because I think that kind of helps them create those expectations so that they understand what you expect from them. Understanding how to survey the progress that you're making in these types of classes. One of the things that is kind of tough for kids is because they may be used to doing other things, while you're teaching a class. So you have to do certain things every once in a while just to kind of reel them in. When you look at your list of attendees, you know who's there. Sally, what do you think about blah, blah, blah? And just that occasional hit here where somebody's going to get called, somebody's going to get called. The addition of short cycle assessments. Typically, you may want to do that at the beginning of a class. You may want to do that in the middle of the class. How do you keep kids from tuning out? Well, if they know they're going to get called on, if they know that there may be a quiz 20 minutes into this thing, it's kind of keeping them guessing a little bit. And I don't want to suggest that we're playing games here with the students, but it's that thing that they also need to understand, that they need to stay tuned in, because there could be some things that will ultimately affect not just how they learn the material, but their grade as they do this. Another thing is that with some school districts that use a particular platform, there are electronic quizzes that can be incorporated in some of the platforms that you have, that ultimately, with the things that we do, is that with our aeronautics courses, is that we'll use the multiple guess, the multiple choice electronic tests, just like they do with the FAA knowledge exams. And we do that so that they get used to doing those types of exams. Well, it's incorporating those inside the actual platform itself. And in some cases, with some schools, they actually can tie that directly to gradebook. So it can ultimately there go through, check, evaluate, and then it can post the grades from that site there as well. So there, that gets to be kind of efficient with how you're doing things also. So there's several different ways that you can ensure that understanding thing here, and I'll bet that when we get to the best practices, someone may suggest something else here as well. When we look at like the pros and the cons here of this type of learning, I've always been that kind of person that I try to look at it from a positive standpoint, especially when I'm doing anything with kids, because again, kids are going to model what you show. So I always try to be positive. I always try to look at ways that we can make this better, perhaps better than even I could make it in a classroom. So we try to do that here, looking at that silver lining. And when we look at those advantages here, and this again is where I think that STEM courses can be absolutely just as effective to be taught online as they can be in class. There are some hands-on things that may be a little different, some hands-on things that from a lab perspective that we may have to do differently, but that doesn't mean that they can't be done. So again, we have to look at this and to think, okay, how best can I get this student to the finish line? Looking at your own skill set. We all look at that professional development piece differently. And you all look at those things where you can add that additional educational arrow to your quiver. Well, this could be another way for you to be able to kind of flex a different educational teaching muscle here and to learn something a little bit different, which I think is always good for us as well. Some of the pitfalls that we have, and we look at this and we think about, okay, where are the gotchas? Well, one of the big ones, one of the big gotchas, and it has to do with that doggone internet signal, is because we look at this, and it's just like in flight training when we talk to kids about what do you do when that engine fails. It's not if the engine fails, but when it fails. So with this, we look at, okay, what do you do when you drop the connection? Not if you're going to drop the connection, but when you drop the connection. Do you have a backup plan so that when that connection is dropped, to get stuff spooled back up? It can be one of those things as simple as just like letting the kids know, say, guys, look, we're all in this together. We're all trying real hard. I am going to be doing the same thing that I'm asking you guys to do, but if for whatever reason this connection drops, please understand, class is not over. And so you have to let them know that you've got to dial back in as soon as you're able to make that connection. So those are some of the things that you look for with some of those pitfalls that you have there. Another thing here is the actual e-learning, the virtual learning, and sort of the stigma, I think, about this type of learning that you're hearing out there right now. A lot of people are hearing, and a lot of people are bashing online learning. And you're hearing that as like, oh, it's terrible, oh, it's bad. I have actually heard these words come out of educators' mouths where they said in an interview that online learning can actually make students dumber. And I'm just like, what? And the point that this particular educator was making is that if they're not able to practice these skills that they have traditionally done in a classroom, then they kind of, backslide and they lose some of that skill set. Well, part of that's on us. Part of that is on us to figure out, okay, how do we keep those skill sets up? How do we keep those educational chops up here for these kids? So that's kind of on us. And I also encourage people not to believe the negative hype that there may be on online learning. And again, and I say that, guys, not because I'm great online teacher guy, because I'm not. But I do know, and I have seen the effects that can happen with online learning and the success that the kids can have. We have to think about it differently. We have to approach it differently, but we can still get them to the finish line, and we can still get them there with a high degree of efficacy here in what it is that we're attempting to teach, and so that they reach the finish line with a high degree of proficiency. So that's part of what this is. So again, it's like that trying to avoid that negative stigma to that, I think, is one of the things there. And you folks may have some other gotchas in there as well. And so now, as we get here to the end, I'd like to open this up here, and Joey, if you don't mind, Joey, we're going to kind of open this up. Some of you may have added some questions here that we may get to, offering some best practices, comments that you have. I also want to say on here, and I failed to do this, guys, but please forgive me. My email, I want to give that to you here as well, because I forgot to put it on the slide, doggone it. It's groark, Groark, at redbirdflight.com. And if there's something else that you think of, something else that you want to share with me, or something that you'd like me to pass along or whatever, I'd love to be able to do that. So there's that. And with that, Joey, what, if any, questions might we have?
Awesome. Yep, we've got one question from David Cohen. He asks, or makes the statement and then asks, our school district may do a hybrid with me in the classroom and some kids, but the rest of the kids online. Do you have any suggestions on how to approach this methodology?
First of all, David, great question. And this is, as I was doing that, I almost said the word pioneering. I wasn't a pioneer in this. I was standing on the shoulders of genius. I did a lot of this actually in the classroom. A couple of things here, David, is this. It is a perfect opportunity to help make those students that have to be tuning in, where they're, my assumption is, David, is that they're trying to limit the spacing by limiting the students that they have, and probably alternating the schedules that they have with this, is to make those students that are tuning in at home feel like they're in the classroom. Make them feel like they're there. Yes, you're addressing other people in the room. You're addressing other people in the room, but then don't forget to come back to that camera and talk to Susie, who is there in her bedroom taking the class there as well. So again, you've got your carbon-based life forms that are there in your class. Pay attention to them, certainly, but don't ignore the electronic ones that are on the other end of this camera. The other thing is that from a lecture standpoint with things, the lecture part of it is the lecture part. The opportunity then for students to participate in with this, real easy when you're in a class. Guys who can answer this question for me, hand goes up, you choose someone. Well, don't forget to try to incorporate that into your electronic student as well, because they need to know that, again, they're part of that class. What you don't want to do is that with that staggered schedule is you don't want them to feel like, well, really my class is like every other day. I'm not really taking the class. You want them to feel as though that class is every bit as real for them when they're taking this at home as it is when they're there in the classroom. Hands-on materials, things like that, where you're doing things, you kind of have to think, okay, there is some of this stuff, like for instance, the things that we would do called couch flying, where you can do some of these physical things, etc., at home, but thinking in terms of how you're going to stagger that so that you can make the best use of those kids' time when they're there and may actually have access to equipment that they may not have access to at home, to be able to do that also. So that's just the big thing, is just make sure that those kids understand that they're tuning in at home, that they are every bit as a part of that class as when they are actually physically there in that class. David, great question.
Okay, and then David says thanks. And then we have a comedian teacher, John. He asks, can the right light filter give him an awesome tan?
John, first of all, hello. Yes, it can. I don't have one of those, but yes, it can. That's a great question, though.
But that's all the questions we have from the audience. So if anyone else wants to submit anything, otherwise we'll wrap it up here in just a minute.
Yeah, and guys, while you're doing that, again, let me give my email one more time. And please apologize. I have to say, please apologize. I apologize. Please forgive me for not getting the email up there as well. And Joey, I may ask you to also add your email here also, as I volunteer you for that.
Sure, of
But
course.
it's Groark, GROARK at redbirdflight.com. And so anything that you care to pass along to me, anything else like there, I'd be curious to know what you think, how things are going for you, and again, more importantly, what things we may be able to do to help you. And that's why we do these webinars. That's why we do the series that we do. So because, you know, we're all in this together. So.
Actually, we've got another question that just came in.
Okay.
Oh, a few others actually. Assuming we may not have access to Redbird simulators, is there an online program that you would recommend?
It's a great question. So there are some other products that are out there that are not necessarily, you know, our simulators. There are other simulators there. Whenever I'm doing talks like this, I try to be simulator agnostic as best I can, but sometimes it's hard for me to do that. It depends on what it is that you're looking to do here with those simulators. So if it is a visual standpoint with things, there are some third-party apps I know that are out there that kind of do the same thing that you can do with airspeed, altitude, orientation, things like that, by having the app thing actually on a phone that students have ultimately used before for just kind of some flight-based orientation type things. Here's the big caveat to this. The big caveat is that you have to understand that the equipment that we're using, anytime that we're using it in conjunction with courses like aeronautics, is that these are tools, not toys. Because what you don't want to do is to create that monster that now all of a sudden we're gaming and we're not necessarily learning. And that's kind of where, again, as I try not to sound like, you know, Redbird honk here like I am, but it's that thing that I have seen in the past where students have, and I don't want to say gotten into trouble, but where students have learned bad habits. And then it takes a while. The laws of primacy, that which you learn first, you learn best. And so those are things, some habits that we have had to actually break once it comes time to laying hands on equipment. So it's kind of that double-edged sword. Here's my commitment to you for asking that question. Let me give this a little bit more thought, and then perhaps I can post something here that might help answer that a little better than I have right now.
Okay, great. Well, thank y'all everybody for joining us today. I think we got everybody's questions answered. A few of you, I said just go ahead and email Greg directly. We'll be doing a few more of these coming up in August, getting y'all ready for the school year. And you know, if you need anything, we're here for you.
Guys, thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate you taking the time to tune in. And Joey, thank you.
Yep. Have a good day, everyone.